Tonight on Chronicle, while cleaning out her grandmother's attic, she uncovered a lost story of generosity and compassion.
At first I was confused. I had no idea what this was, so I went running downstairs to ask my mother, and she burst into tears, and she said, "Oh my gosh, she found the foot tracings."
How this author and illustrator's 1,000 tracings is healing the wounds of World War II.
It was an amazing experience because I grew up knowing all about what my grandparents had done with their conservation, and grew up respecting them and admiring them and knew that others did as well. But I didn't really know this side of them, the humanitarian side of them.
Absolutely beautiful, and we're going to prove it to you tomorrow. Tonight, we bring you the story of a New Hampshire author and illustrator who found the springboard to her career in her grandmother's attic.
Lita Judge was cleaning out her grandparents' Midwestern farmhouse when she came upon a trunk full of old letters from Europe, along with thousands of tracings of shoes cut from old newspaper.
The true story that emerged is moving and powerful and timeless, and has resulted in a children's book that is already getting incredible reviews.
Jennifer Crompton visited Judge in her studio at her home in Peterborough and met a talented young woman with a fascinating story of her own.
A little girl sits on the floor of her Midwestern farmhouse, matching donated shoes and boots to tracings of feet. They've arrived in letters from families in Europe who are cold and hungry in the aftermath of World War II. The girl and her mother have rallied a relief effort to help ease the wounds of war. 1,000 Tracings is a children's book based on a true story, a story that might have been lost had it not been for a discovery made in the farmhouse where it began over a half-century later.
In the attic, I discovered a box full of envelopes, and I lifted out the envelope, and inside were foot tracings, and they were on old newspaper, and the postmarks were all from Europe. And at first I was confused. I had no idea what this was, so I went running downstairs to ask my mother, and she burst into tears, and she said, "Oh my gosh, she found the foot tracings." And she immediately started telling me about the fact that my grandparents had done a relief effort after World War II to help particularly Germans, but all Europeans who were starving and had very little food and clothing.
Lita Judge's mother is the little girl in the story. Her grandmother, the woman who spearheaded an effort that resulted in care packages being sent to over 3,000 people in 15 European countries. 1,000 Tracings is a timeless story of hope and kindness dedicated to the women who inspired it.
And the neighbors that were helping were all women, and they were scientists. My grandparents reached out to other ornithologists to help, to find volunteers, because that's who they knew. But it was really the mothers and the children who were doing the work of finding these packages.
It was from her adopted hometown of Peterborough, New Hampshire, that Lita Judge set out to write and illustrate their story in her very first children's book. Locals posed for her, even her husband got in the act, resulting in lush watercolor illustrations that capture the mood of the characters and of the time, the thoroughness and passion for her work reminiscent of the women before her.
I found survivors on both the American side and the German side who remembered sending packages and receiving packages. And I even found one survivor in Germany who had saved over 60 letters that my grandmother had written to her father during the time that they were sending these relief packages. And she gave me those letters. And it described my grandmother's just angst over finding enough food and clothing for everybody, and her desperate desire to make a difference in these lives, and just to put the war behind all of us. She was really, through these letters, I found out how torn up my grandmother was during the war.
The text is simple, the themes universal. Children worry about not being reunited with their fathers. People reach out to help those they've never met. No effort is too small to be appreciated.
It was an amazing experience because I grew up knowing all about what my grandparents had done with their conservation. They had fought for years to save prairie chickens from extinction, and they had worked so hard to breed eagles in captivity. And I had known what they had done for the environment and grew up respecting them and admiring them and knew that others did as well. But I didn't really know this side of them, the humanitarian side of them.
Like the women before her, Lita Judge follows her instincts. Telling the story of 1,000 Tracings is a piece of her own story that has evolved in fascinating chapters. She grew up in remote areas of Alaska and the West, spending lots of time with wildlife and in the outdoors. Her parents and grandparents were respected scientists, so her own career began digging for bones.
I just assumed I would be a scientist and got a degree and worked as a geologist. And it wasn't until after I met my husband that he started taking me to art museums, and I fell in love with art. And I could see that art wasn't actually all that different from the sciences. It requires observation and a lot of contemplation and a lot of study. And it's kind of the best of the both worlds.
With the passion of her forebears, Lita Judge poured herself into painting. Self-taught, she worked with oils on the streets of Europe, creating paintings sold in fine art galleries. In 2002, she was on a flight with her husband Dave when their plane was forced to land in Manchester. Her instincts led her to another pivotal shift in her life.
They couldn't get all of us on flights that day, so Dave and I immediately volunteered to fly the next day, thinking it would be fun to go to just hang out in New Hampshire. And I wanted to check where Abbott Thayer lived, because I was a huge fan of the paintings of Abbott Thayer. And so we jumped off the plane and rented a car for the day and came out to Peterborough. Actually, we were going to Dublin to inspect, and we loved it so much we went for a walk, and we made a pact that day to turn around and move back to New Hampshire.
And so a new chapter would come into full bloom, inspired here in the farmhouse, modeled after her grandmother's. In 2005, Lita Judge became a writer, breathing life into the discovery she'd made in its attic several years earlier.
You know, I tried to tell the story from my family's point of view, but include the efforts done by everybody. So many people came together, and I think that generation, would have been uncomfortable talking about it. So this way I could celebrate what she did. I mean, what she gave to me is my own passion and interest in life and my love of nature. And I think leaving this story to be discovered after her death was just, it turned out to be my first children's book, and now I'm off and running and doing other stories. And so I think it was meant to be told afterwards. Partly it was her last gift to me. I mean, discovering that package was just, her last gift.
And so the discoveries continue. Coming up, the inspiring new career of Lita Judge as she shares her creative process and gives us a peek at what's on the horizon.
Coming up, happy birthday to the junk man.
Coming up next.
And the painting is the time to just do what you've done your homework, you've figured out what you want to do. Now it's just time to make the painting work.